The garden party interrupted. The village of St. Mary Mead was a picture of peaceful order as the early summer sun bathed the manicured gardens of Thornfield Manor in a gentle golden light. The air was perfumed by a mixture of freshly cut grass, blossoming roses, and the faintest hint of Lady Agatha's favored lavender sachets. It was a day when the village came alive in a chorus of polite laughter, soft-spoken conversation, and the quiet rustle of silk and linen dresses against gravel paths. Chapter 1. On this particular afternoon, the annual summer garden party was in full swing, and the manor grounds buzzed with the mingling of old friends, curious newcomers, and the occasional visitor from neighboring towns. The well-tended flower beds bordered the wide stone terraces where neatly set tables groaned under the weight of delicate pastries, crystal decanters filled with iced tea, and silver trays laden with cucumber sandwiches. The murmur of conversation ebbed and flowed like the gentle summer breeze that teased the edges of the great manor's tall windows. Seated on a wrought iron chair beneath the shade of a venerable chestnut tree, Miss Jane Marple calmly knitted a fine cream-colored scarf. Her sharp eyes scanned the gathering with the quiet patience that had become her signature. The faint creak of her knitting needles punctuated the ambient noise, unnoticed by most but a comforting rhythm to those who knew her well. Miss Marple was the sort of woman who seemed to melt effortlessly into the background, her appearance unassuming, her manner gentle and quietly observant. Yet beneath that soft exterior lay a mind as keen as any detective's, honed over years of watching the subtleties of human nature play out in the small corners of village life. She rarely spoke loudly or drew attention to herself, preferring instead to collect impressions as a spider weaves a web, patient and meticulous. The party was a perfect tableau for such observation. Nearby, Lady Agatha Thornfield held court with effortless grace, her presence commanding even in a crowd. Her silver hair, pinned neatly above her high collar, framed a face marked by fine lines that hinted at decades of unyielding will and social maneuvering. Her laughter rang out, bright and calculated, as she deftly navigated conversations that hinted at power, wealth, and influence. Beside her stood her nephew, Richard Blackwood, a man in his early 30s with sharply defined features and eyes that rarely rested. He moved among the younger guests like a chess master surveying the board, always calculating, always a few steps ahead. Richard was known in the village for his charm and his quick temper, but today, even his usual confident smile seemed forced. Among the younger guests was Miss Eliza Fairclough, a striking figure with chestnut hair that caught the sunlight and eyes of such vivid blue they seemed almost unnaturally bright. Eliza was an enigma to many, a newcomer to St. Mary Mead who had swiftly become the center of whispered speculation. Some admired her independence and poise, others whispered about her mysterious past and her unsettled manner. Today, she wore a delicate black lace glove on her left hand, a stark contrast to the pale cream of her summer dress, and the glove seemed to draw the eye of more than one onlooker. The gentle hum of the party was broken when a shrill call came from the direction of the servants' wing. It was the voice of Mr. James Wilcox, Lady Thornfield's long-serving steward. His usually composed expression was replaced by an unmistakable look of alarm. "Madam, you must come at once," he called, hurrying through the gathering with unusually rapid steps. "It's Miss Fairclough, she's been found." The words trailed off into silence, but the urgency was enough to still the entire party. Conversations ceased mid-sentence, and even the birds seemed to pause in their singing. The laughter died away like a flame smothered beneath a blanket. Miss Marple's knitting froze in her lap as she rose slowly, her sharp gaze narrowing ever so slightly. A calm yet unmistakable tension settled over the guests as they followed Mr. Wilcox toward the house, their feet crunching softly on the gravel path. Inside the manor, the cool shade of the dimly lit corridor felt suddenly oppressive. The party's bright gaiety was replaced by a thick, heavy silence that seemed to cling to the very walls. The guests moved in small clusters, whispers rising and falling like waves, each voice laced with fear, curiosity, or something darker, anticipation. At the foot of the grand oak staircase, the body of Eliza Fairclough lay sprawled, unnatural in its stillness. Her left hand clutched the black lace glove tightly, the delicate fabric bunched and creased as if it were the last tangible connection to some dreadful secret. Her face was pale, the features frozen in an expression of mute terror. Lady Thornfield gasped sharply, her eyes wide and glassy as she took in the scene. "My God! Eliza!" Her voice trembled, betraying the control she usually maintained. The maid who had found Eliza, a young woman named Clara, stood nearby, trembling. I came to fetch her for tea and I found her like this, ma'am." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, heavy with shock. Miss Marple stepped forward with gentle assurance, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with quiet precision: the angle of the fallen body, the disturbed rug beneath the stairs, the faint scent of gardenias lingering faintly in the air despite the indoor surroundings. Her gaze settled finally on the glove in Eliza's hand. It was an elegant piece, finely made but with a small tear near the wrist. She noted the contrast between the dark lace and the otherwise summery attire of the young woman. Something about the glove seemed out of place, a detail that might puzzle others, but to Miss Marple, it was a whisper of a story waiting to be told. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, aware that every person present was already imagining 1,000 possibilities. Some would jump to conclusions, others would cling to hope. But Miss Marple knew the truth was seldom found in the obvious. Outside, the steady chime of the village clock announced the hour, 3 o'clock, a time when the sun hung high and shadows were brief. But inside Thornfield Manor, the shadows stretched long and dark, heralding a day that would forever change the peaceful rhythm of St. Mary Mead. As the first stirrings of panic began to ripple through the assembled guests, Miss Marple quietly resolved to observe and listen, her greatest tools in a mystery woven not from physical evidence, but from the delicate threads of human nature. The news of Miss Eliza Fairclaw's death rippled through St. Mary Mead like a sudden chill, unsettling the familiar rhythms of the village as surely as a storm disturbs calm waters. By evening, whispers had become conversations, and conversations had turned into heated debates over cups of tea in parlors, behind lace curtains, and along cobbled streets. At the village green, groups gathered beneath the flickering gas lamps, their voices a mixture of disbelief, speculation, and fear. It was a small place where everyone's affairs were known, or believed to be, and the sudden shadow cast by such a shocking event unsettled even the most composed of villagers. Miss Marple herself had returned quietly to her modest cottage on the outskirts of the village. Yet even as she sat by her fire, the low crackle of flames doing little to soothe her, her mind was far from rest. She listened attentively to the murmurs of those who visited or called upon her, each bringing a piece of the growing puzzle, unwittingly revealing the hidden corners of the village's social tapestry. "Did you hear, Miss Marple? Poor Eliza, found at the foot of the stairs," whispered Mrs. Emmeline Carter, the postmistress, clutching her shawl tightly. "Some say it must have been an accident. A tragic misstep, perhaps." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Accidents often seem simple at first, Mrs. Carter. But the truth, as you know, is usually more complicated." Across the village, Mrs. Carter's words echoed the cautious theories many offered. Some believed Eliza's death was a tragic accident, perhaps a feint caused her to fall, or she had slipped on the polished floorboards. Others, however, entertained darker possibilities. At the Crown and Anchor, the local pub, the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. The landlord, Mr. Henry Dawson, a man of stout build and a booming voice, gathered a small crowd around the hearth. "Mark my words," he declared, slamming his hand on the wooden table, "there's foul play involved. That young woman had enemies. You mark my words, someone wanted her gone." A murmur of agreement circled the room, but Miss Marple, who had stopped by for a quiet moment earlier, had observed the group with quiet detachment. It was the sort of hasty judgment she expected when fear took hold, eager to place blame but reluctant to seek understanding. Meanwhile, the village vicar, Reverend Timothy Hargreaves, preached calm and patience during the Sunday service. His voice, measured and comforting, attempted to steady a congregation rattled by the news. "We must remember," he intoned solemnly, "that justice is best served by truth, not rumor or haste. We shall pray for Miss Fairclaw's soul, and for the wisdom to uncover the facts with charity and care." Yet, Beneath his calm words, even the Reverend seemed unsettled. Miss Marple, sitting quietly in the back pew, noted the way his hands trembled slightly as he clasped the Bible. As the days passed, the undercurrent of gossip swelled. At the village bakery, Mrs. Pritchard served bread and sympathy in equal measure, exchanging knowing glances and hushed words with her customers. "It's strange," she whispered to a friend. "Eliza Fairclough never quite fitted in, did she? Always polite, but distant. And that glove, who wears black lace at a summer garden party?" Such remarks, though casual, gave Miss Marple much to ponder. She knew well that in a village like St. Mary Mead, appearances were often masks, and every smile could hide a story. Meanwhile, the Thornfield household was abuzz with its own tensions. Lady Agatha, once the epitome of composure, now spent hours pacing the drawing room, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of pearls. Richard Blackwood was seldom seen without a cigarette between his fingers, his sharp gaze distant as he muttered to himself in the empty corridors. The household staff whispered amongst themselves, eyes cast downward but ears keen. Mr. Wilcox, the steward, maintained an air of stoic professionalism, but even he could not conceal the dark circles beneath his eyes. Miss Marple had visited the manor twice since the discovery, always unannounced and with the softest of footsteps. Each time, she spoke with different members of the household, her gentle questions often met with guarded responses. One afternoon, she found herself speaking with Mrs. Penelope Finch, the housekeeper, a woman whose life had been devoted to Thornfield Manor for over 3 decades. "It's been dreadful, Miss Marple," Mrs. Finch confided, her voice trembling slightly. "Miss Fairclough was a mystery even to us." "Yes, but there was something unsettled about her. And that glove, it arrived just days before the party, tucked inside a letter she never showed anyone." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of her knitting bag. "A letter, you say? Was the sender known?" Mrs. Finch shook her head. "No name. Just a plain envelope with neat handwriting." Miss Fairclough looked troubled after reading it, but she said nothing. This small detail, the letter, the glove, occupied Miss Marple's thoughts long after she left the manor. It was often the smallest threads that unraveled the most tangled knots. Outside Thornfield, the villagers grew restless. Some began to take sides, their opinions hardened by gossip and half-truths. The local shopkeeper, Mr. Albert Mills, found himself in the uncomfortable position of mediating between customers who whispered of scandal, suspicion, and long-buried grudges. "People are too quick to judge," he muttered to his wife one evening. "But the truth, I fear, is far from simple." In the village school, even the children spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy, their innocent curiosity tinged with an eerie sense of foreboding. Amidst all this, Miss Marple remained quietly observant. She paid close attention to the little things, the fleeting glance between Lady Agatha and Richard Blackwood, the nervous hesitation of Mrs. Carter when asked about her afternoon errands, the subtle avoidance of certain questions by the staff. Her understanding was that a murder in a small village was never just about the victim or the act itself. It was a culmination of old resentments, unspoken rivalries, and secrets carefully guarded beneath the surface. On the 4th day after the discovery, Miss Marple attended the village hall, where the police had called a meeting to address the growing concerns. Detective Inspector Harold Bridges, a man new to St. Mary Mead and unfamiliar with its intricate social fabric, spoke with brisk authority. "We are treating this as a suspicious death," he announced. "All evidence points to foul play. We ask the villagers to remain calm and assist the investigation by sharing any information that may be relevant." His words were met with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Some nodded in approval, eager for resolution. Others exchanged worried glances, as if fearing what the investigation might uncover. After the meeting, as the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple lingered at the edge of the hall. She noted the anxious energy in the room, the way some avoided eye contact, and the whispered conversations that resumed almost immediately. In her mind, the puzzle pieces were beginning to take shape, but the picture was still far from complete. She resolved to visit Thornfield Manor again, to speak with those who might be reluctant to talk to the police, and to look for the subtle clues that only a patient observer could find. For Miss Marple, the game had only just begun. Chapter 2. Early Investigation. The morning after the village meeting dawned overcast and cool, the kind of gray light that seemed to seep into one's bones and encourage introspection. Miss Marple sat quietly at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea before her and a notebook opened but untouched. Instead, her thoughts wandered over the fragments she had gathered in recent days, the furtive glances, the half-spoken words, the odd tension beneath the village's polite surface. She was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Constable Tom Baker, a young man still finding his feet in the ways of St. Mary Mead. "Morning, Miss Marple," he greeted, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. "Detective Inspector Bridges asked me to deliver this." He handed her a small, folded piece of paper. Curious, Miss Marple unfolded it. It was a list of names, those who had attended the garden party, and those who had been interviewed by the police so far. Beneath the list, a note read, "Any observations, however small, would be appreciated." Miss Marple gave a small smile. "Thank you, Tom. I shall keep it in mind." The constable nodded and left, and Miss Marple returned to her notebook, now feeling the steady pull of purpose. Her first visit of the day was to Thornfield Manor, where the household was still unsettled but slowly settling into the rhythm imposed by grief and suspicion. Lady Agatha met her in the drawing room, her posture rigid, but her eyes softened at the sight of the kindly spinster. "Miss Marple, I'm grateful you've come," she said quietly. "This tragedy has cast a shadow over us all." Miss Marple inclined her head. "It is a difficult time for everyone, Lady Agatha. I only hope we might shed some light on what truly happened." Lady Agatha gestured toward the windows, where the gardens glistened with recent rain. "I fear there are tensions here that have long been hidden. Eliza was not of our world, yet she stirred feelings, both admiration and resentment." Miss Marple nodded. "Such divisions often run deep. May I ask, what was Miss Fairclaw's relationship with your nephew, Richard?" Lady Agatha hesitated, then sighed. "Complicated, I'm afraid. Richard was intrigued by her. But there were matters best left unspoken." A hint of something unspoken flickered in Lady Agatha's eyes, perhaps regret, perhaps warning. From there, Miss Marple was directed to Richard himself, who was found in the library, pacing with the restless energy of a caged animal. His hands bore the marks of recent tension, and his face was pale. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," he said abruptly, eyes flashing with unease. "Eliza was a puzzle I never solved. I can't say I knew her well enough to understand what might have happened." Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "Sometimes it is the things left unsaid that tell the truest stories, Mr. Blackwood." Richard bit his lip but said no more. Turning her attention to the household staff, Miss Marple spoke with Mrs. Penelope Finch, the housekeeper, who remained steadfast despite the strain. "Did Miss Fairclaw have visitors or correspondence that seemed unusual?" Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Finch recalled the mysterious letter and the black lace glove. "Yes, ma'am. The glove was quite out of place, elegant, but somber. And the letter seemed to trouble her deeply. She kept it hidden." Miss Marple filed this quietly, knowing that even small items like a glove could carry great significance. In the days that followed, the police moved with measured diligence, questioning guests and staff alike. Detective Inspector Bridges was thorough but occasionally struggled to navigate the delicate social currents of St. Mary Mead. He relied heavily on Constable Baker for local insight, but it was Miss Marple who began to see the invisible threads connecting the suspects. She noted that some guests had been unusually eager to cooperate, while others seemed reluctant or evasive. It was in these subtleties, the hesitation in a voice, the avoidance of eye contact, the slight change in posture, that she found clues far richer than any physical evidence. One afternoon, she visited the vicar, Reverend Hargreaves, at the rectory. The man appeared burdened, his usually serene countenance shadowed by worry. "I find it difficult to reconcile such darkness with our peaceful village life," he confided. "Yet I sense there are secrets even I have not been told." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Everyone carries secrets, Reverend. It is how we guard them that shapes their power. In conversation, the Reverend mentioned a dispute between Eliza and a local shopkeeper, Mr. Albert Mills, over a parcel that had gone missing days before the party. A trivial matter, perhaps, he said, but it seemed to upset Miss Fairclough greatly. This piqued Miss Marple's interest. She decided to visit Mr. Mills the following morning. At the shop, the shopkeeper was brusque but nervous. He admitted to the quarrel but denied any wrongdoing. Miss Fairclough was always difficult, he grumbled. She seemed to think the whole village was against her. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with understanding. Perception can be as influential as fact, Mr. Mills. As she left, she observed how the villagers watched her, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. The community was tightly knit, and a stranger's death had stirred currents best left undisturbed. Returning home, Miss Marple pondered the growing list of motives and grudges. The elusive letter, the black lace glove, the fractured relationships, all pieces of a puzzle she was beginning to assemble. She recalled the scene at Thornfield Manor, the way Lady Agatha's composure had faltered just once, the restless pacing of Richard Blackwood, the quiet fear in the eyes of the household staff. In her mind, she turned these observations over like a delicate piece of embroidery, seeking the pattern hidden beneath the surface. Her quiet reflections were interrupted by the arrival of a note slipped beneath her door, a hastily scrawled message reading simply, "Not everything is as it seems. Beware those closest to you." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Someone wished to warn her, or perhaps unsettle her. Either way, it was a reminder that in St. Mary Mead, the shadows stretched longer than they appeared. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her notebook. The investigation was still in its infancy, but Miss Marple already sensed that the path to truth would not be straightforward. The quiet village hid more than one tangled thread, and it was up to her to unravel them before the darkness claimed another victim. The days that followed the discovery of Miss Eliza Fairclough's body settled into a strange, uneasy rhythm in St. Mary Mead. The sun continued to rise and set over the village, but beneath its serene surface, suspicion simmered like a barely controlled flame. The villagers, once united in their shock and grief, now found themselves quietly divided, their whispered conversations filled with speculation and guarded accusations. Detective Inspector Harold Bridges, determined to find answers swiftly, focused his attention on those closest to Eliza in the hours before her death. The police were eager to bring the case to a close, their eyes drawn to the most obvious suspects, the nephew Richard Blackwood, whose restless temperament and complicated relationship with Eliza made him a natural person of interest, and the seemingly loyal but silent household staff, who knew the manor and its inhabitants better than anyone. Miss Marple watched this unfolding with quiet reserve. She knew well that the obvious was often a carefully constructed facade, designed to mislead and conceal. Yet even as the police probed Richard and the servants, the spinster's keen eyes noted something else, something subtler. Her first conversation that morning was with Richard himself. She found him seated in the small sitting room, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and an unspoken tension. His usual sharp eyes now held a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and troubled thoughts. "I don't deny I was frustrated with Eliza," Richard admitted without preamble, his voice low. "She was evasive and secretive, and I wanted answers she refused to give. But I did not kill her." Miss Marple inclined her head, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes frustration leads to confrontation, but the act itself is quite another matter." Richard looked away for a moment, then back. "There were arguments, yes. But they never turned violent. I cared for her in my own way." The admission was revealing, but Miss Marple could tell that Richard was guarding something. There was a reticence, a careful distance in his words. It was the kind of guardedness born not from guilt, but from fear. Later that day, Miss Marple met with Mrs. Penelope Finch, the housekeeper, who had remained steadfast throughout the turmoil. The woman's usually composed demeanor was now shadowed by anxiety. Miss Fairclough was not an easy guest, Mrs. Finch confessed. She kept to herself, and the staff found her difficult. There were moments when tempers flared quietly, but nothing overtly threatening. Miss Marple probed gently, "Were there any particular incidents that stand out to you?" Mrs. Finch hesitated, then lowered her voice. There was a quarrel between Miss Fairclough and one of the gardeners, Thomas Reed. Something about the pruning of the rose bushes. It seemed trivial, but it upset her deeply. This detail added a new name to Miss Marple's growing list of individuals with potential motive or opportunity. She resolved to speak with Thomas Reed soon. Meanwhile, the village was rife with gossip concerning other guests at the garden party. At the general store, Mrs. Margaret Collins was emphatic in her opinion. "Don't forget Mrs. Beatrice Lacey," she insisted to a circle of listeners. "She and Eliza were never friends. I heard them arguing not long before the party." Mrs. Lacey was a widow in her 50s, known for her sharp tongue and a guarded heart. Her reputation for petty quarrels was well established, making her an easy target for suspicion. Miss Marple was cautious. She knew that in the small social circles of a village, tensions could be magnified and distorted. Every slight was a story, every whispered disagreement a possible motive. Her visit to Mrs. Lacey was revealing. The woman met her with a guarded smile, arms crossed. "Yes, Eliza and I did have our differences," Mrs. Lacey admitted, "but murder? That's a dreadful accusation." When Miss Marple asked about the nature of their quarrel, Mrs. Lacey's eyes flickered. "She accused me of spreading rumors about her past, things I never said." It was a tangled web of suspicion and old resentments. Back at Thornfield Manor, another figure emerged from the shadows, Dr. Stephen Harrow, the local physician. Known for his quiet manner and trusted presence, Dr. Harrow had treated many of the village residents, including Eliza. Miss Marple found him in his consulting room, where the scent of antiseptic mingled oddly with the faint aroma of tobacco. "She was troubled," Dr. Harrow said without hesitation. "More than the others knew. Eliza confided in me once or twice, but I fear she kept much to herself." "Did he suspect foul play?" Miss Marple asked. He sighed. "I did not think so at first. But since her death, I have wondered if her fears were more justified than I imagined." The doctor's words added a new layer of mystery. What had Eliza feared, and from whom? Among the villagers, opinions hardened. The local baker, Mrs. Pritchard, was adamant. "Richard Blackwood is too quick to anger," she told a customer. And Lady Agatha's servants seemed tight-lipped. Something's being hidden. Meanwhile, the village constable reported an anonymous letter found in the post, echoing the warning Miss Marple had received. "Beware those closest to you." The message sent a shiver through the community. Throughout these days, Miss Marple moved quietly, gently probing, observing without alarm. She was like a spider weaving a web, patiently waiting for the strands to tighten. She noted how Lady Agatha Thornfield maintained her icy composure, but at times, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. She noted how Richard's restless energy sometimes gave way to moments of genuine sorrow, and how the household staff exchanged uneasy glances, perhaps weighing loyalty against truth. It was clear that beneath the surface of Thornfield Manor, and indeed the entire village, lay a tangled skein of secrets, resentments, and fears. At the same time, Miss Marple kept close to the small but persistent details: the black lace glove, the mysterious letter, the small tear at the glove's wrist that seemed to carry a story in itself. As the police began to narrow their focus on Richard and several staff members, Miss Marple remained unconvinced. The threads she followed hinted at a more complex tapestry than a single, straightforward crime of passion. In the quiet of her own home one evening, she sat by the fire, pen in hand, sketching a mental map of the relationships, the motives, the lies, and the truths. The pieces were beginning to align, but the final picture remained just out of reach. Outside, the village slept under a blanket of stars, unaware that its secrets were being carefully unraveled by the woman who understood human nature better than most. Miss Marple, patient and unassuming, was ready for the next move. Chapter 3. A Hidden Clue. The slow unraveling of the village's calm was punctuated by a discovery so slight it might have been overlooked entirely, if not for Miss Marple's ever-watchful eyes. It was one of those moments where the smallest detail opens a door to secrets long buried, a single thread pulling at the fabric of a carefully constructed lie. Miss Marple had returned once again to Thornfield Manor, under the pretense of offering Lady Agatha her condolences in person. But beneath the polished civility of the manner, the spinster's mind was already turning over everything she had learned, every glance, every hesitation, every whispered word. This time, she requested to see the drawing room where the garden party had been held before the tragic event. The room was quiet, its once cheerful air now heavy with a lingering sadness. The elegant draperies were drawn slightly, softening the light, and the faint scent of gardenias still hung faintly, as if the flowers themselves mourned. Lady Agatha joined her there, graceful but tense. "It is hard to believe such violence could erupt here," she murmured. "We are all shattered." Miss Marple nodded, then, as if distracted by a loose thread in the tapestry on the far wall, she stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed on something near the fireplace, a slight irregularity in the otherwise pristine carpet. Kneeling carefully, she lifted a small object, a single black lace glove, much like the one Eliza had been found clutching, but this one was faintly soiled at the fingertips, and its wrist bore a small tear, mirroring the glove in the victim's hand. Lady Agatha gasped softly, her face paling. How did that come to be here?" "That, my lady, is the question," Miss Marple said quietly, turning the glove over in her hands. "It seems this is no ordinary glove, but a symbol of something more." Her mind raced through possibilities. Why had this glove been left behind? Was it dropped in haste or deliberately placed as a message? And whose glove was it originally? She decided to seek out Thomas Reed, the gardener mentioned earlier by Mrs. Finch, hoping to find answers in a part of the manor often overlooked. Thomas was a man in his late 40s, sun-weathered and rough-handed, with eyes that hinted at a life spent in quiet observation rather than speech. Miss Marple found him in the rose garden, pruning bushes with a careful hand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reed," she said warmly. "I wonder if you might indulge me with a few questions." Thomas wiped his brow, glancing warily but nodding. "Of course, ma'am." She showed him the glove. "Have you seen this before?" His face tightened. "That's one of Miss Fairclaw's gloves, ma'am. I saw her wear them at the party." "And the tear? Do you know how that might have happened?" Thomas shook his head. "No, but I recall Miss Fairclaw was upset about the rose bushes. She said they were being trimmed too harshly. I thought it odd, but I didn't think much of it." Miss Marple's brow furrowed. "Did she say who had been pruning them?" Thomas hesitated. "I do that job mostly, ma'am. But I had a helper the day before the party, a young lad named Peter Holloway. He's new and eager, but sometimes careless." Intrigued, Miss Marple resolved to speak with Peter. The boy was found at the village carpenter's workshop, a nervous lad with dirt under his fingernails and an apologetic smile. "I didn't mean no harm," he said quickly when Miss Marple showed him the glove. "I reckon I might have caught the lace on a thorn while trimming. Did you notice anything unusual the day before the party?" Miss Marple asked gently. Peter shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I did see Miss Fairclaw arguing with someone near the back gate. I couldn't hear much, but it looked serious." "Who was it?" Miss Marple pressed. The boy hesitated. "I'm not sure. The man was tall, wearing a dark coat. He left quick when he saw me." Miss Marple's mind spun. The back gate was a less used entrance, one that could provide a quiet escape or entry. She thanked the boy and walked slowly back to the manor, her thoughts racing. Meanwhile, in the village, the atmosphere was growing more charged. The discovery of the second glove had become known, and rumors ran rampant. Some whispered of secret meetings in the dead of night, others speculated about hidden romances and bitter betrayals. Miss Marple visited Mrs. Carter, the postmistress, who had become an unexpected source of village news. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Carter confided, "there's talk of a stranger seen near Thornfield just days before the party. No one knows who he was, but some think he had business with Miss Fairclaw." Miss Marple's eyes glinted. "A stranger, you say?" "Yes. Dark coat, tall figure, left in a hurry. It matches what young Peter said." Piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape, but there were still many questions. Who was this mysterious visitor? What was the nature of his quarrel with Eliza? And why had the second glove been left in the drawing room, as if marking a secret trail? That evening, Miss Marple sat in her cozy sitting room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows. She carefully laid the two gloves side by side, the one found with Eliza's body, and the one discovered near the fireplace. The small tears, the subtle differences in wear, the faint scent of gardenia still clinging to the fabric, all whispered secrets she was determined to hear. Her thoughts returned to the note she had received, the warning to beware those closest to her. It was becoming clear that the true danger lay not in strangers but among those who walked the village paths every day. Miss Marple resolved to tread carefully, to watch closely, and to listen to the quietest voices, for in the intricate dance of secrets and lies, the smallest clue often illuminated the darkest truths. The fragile calm in St. Mary Mead began to unravel with surprising speed. As the village grappled with the shock of Eliza Fairclaw's death, long-buried tensions and hidden resentment surfaced, drawn out by the probing questions of the police, and by the subtle inquiries of Miss Marple. The discovery of the second glove had cast new suspicion on those within Thornfield Manor and beyond. Rumors that once whispered in shadow now gathered volume, revealing fractures beneath the village's polished veneer. Miss Marple felt the weight of these revelations during her visit to the local inn, the Crown and Anchor. The dim light and thick wooden beams lent a sense of timelessness to the room, but the atmosphere was charged with uneasy energy. A small gathering of villagers sat clustered in hushed conversation, their faces lined with worry and suspicion. She approached the group quietly, nodding to familiar faces. Mrs. Beatrice Lacey, her sharp eyes flickering beneath lowered lids, glanced at Miss Marple with a mixture of defiance and caution. "It seems the past is catching up with us all," Mrs. Lacey remarked, her voice low but clear. "Eliza's death has unearthed more than anyone expected." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Indeed, Mrs. Lacey. Sometimes tragedy is the prism through which we see the true colors of those around us." Mrs. Lacey's gaze hardened. "I've said my piece to the police, but there are things best left alone." Before Miss Marple could respond, a new voice cut through the murmur, Richard Blackwood, who had entered the inn with a purposeful stride. His pale face was set, his jaw clenched. "I won't stand for these insinuations," he declared, voice ringing through the room. "My aunt, Lady Agatha, and I have been nothing but open. This village thrives on gossip, but it does no one any good." His words silenced the room, but eyes lingered on him with suspicion, unwilling to be swayed so easily. Miss Marple stepped forward gently. "Mr. Blackwood, the truth is seldom found in accusations or defenses alone. It lies in understanding the complexities behind the actions." Richard looked at her for a moment, then nodded slightly. Later that evening, Miss Marple found herself alone with Lady Agatha in the drawing room of Thornfield Manor. The woman's composure was intact, but her eyes revealed a flicker of exhaustion. "Lady Agatha, do you believe someone in the house might be hiding something?" Miss Marple asked carefully. Lady Agatha sighed. "There are old grievances here, Miss Marple. Things from before I arrived that have never been fully resolved. Eliza was an outsider, but she brought secrets with her." Miss Marple probed further. "Secrets about the manor? Or about the people who live here?" "Both," Lady Agatha replied, her voice dropping. "I fear Eliza discovered things that some wanted kept quiet." The implication hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. The following day, Miss Marple arranged to meet Thomas Reed, the gardener, once more. His earlier mention of Peter Holloway and the quarrel over the rose bushes had planted a seed of curiosity. In the bright morning light, Thomas was more forthcoming. "Peter isn't used to the work," he said with a shake of his head. "He can be careless. That argument between Miss Fairclaw and me over the pruning was nothing compared to what happened between her and Mrs. Finch." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Finch?" "Yes. The housekeeper." They clashed over Miss Fairclaw's insistence on rearranging parts of the manor's schedule. It upset the staff, and Miss Fairclaw wasn't shy about voicing her displeasure. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Were these disputes public, or kept behind closed doors? Thomas hesitated. Mostly behind closed doors. But the tension was there, simmering. That evening, Miss Marple sought out Mrs. Finch directly. The housekeeper was less guarded than before, her face marked by fatigue. "It's true," Mrs. Finch admitted quietly. Miss Fairclough wanted changes. Changes to how the staff worked, how things were done. She thought she could impose her will, but Thornfield isn't easily changed. Miss Marple's gaze was steady. Did these disputes ever become heated? Mrs. Finch looked away. More than once. There were words exchanged, sharp, bitter words. But I never imagined it would come to this. As the layers peeled back, another figure emerged into view, Mrs. Beatrice Lacey, whose strained relationship with Eliza now took on new weight. Miss Marple arranged a private conversation, and Mrs. Lacey's defenses began to crumble. Eliza accused me of speaking ill of her past, Mrs. Lacey said with a bitter laugh. She wanted the village to believe she was something she was not. Miss Marple pressed gently. What was it she wished to hide? Mrs. Lacey hesitated, then whispered, there were rumors, true or not, about a scandal years ago in the city where Eliza lived before coming here. Some say she was involved with unsavory characters. Whether true or not, it was enough to make some wary. Miss Marple reflected silently. In a village like St. Mary Mead, reputation was a fragile treasure easily shattered. The final confrontation came unexpectedly one afternoon in the village square, where Miss Marple found herself face to face with Richard Blackwood once more. His eyes were dark with frustration. Miss Marple, the police are closing in on the staff on me, he said bitterly. But I know the truth is different. Then share it with me, Miss Marple replied softly. The truth is the only thing that can bring peace. Richard hesitated, then revealed a secret long kept hidden, that Eliza had been seeking evidence of a long-forgotten betrayal involving the Thornfield estate, something that could have destroyed reputations and fortunes alike. It was why she was so distant, he confessed. She wanted to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with understanding. The murder was not just about passion or jealousy, it was about protection, about preserving a delicate balance of power and secrecy. As the sun set over St. Mary Mead, the village felt the tremors of these revelations. The web was growing ever more tangled, and Miss Marple, with her steady hand and sharp mind, prepared for the next step, uncovering the truth that would lay bare not just the killer, but the secrets that had festered beneath the surface for far too long. Chapter 4. Another twist. The village of St. Mary Mead was settling into a tentative unease, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. The revelations unearthed by Miss Marple and the police had stirred old wounds and revealed fresh fractures, but the full picture remained tantalizingly out of reach. Just when some began to hope the truth might soon emerge, the delicate balance shattered once more, plunging the community into deeper confusion. It began with a late afternoon knock at Miss Marple's door. Standing in the warm golden light was Constable Tom Baker, his face lined with concern. Miss Marple, there's been another incident at Thornfield Manor, he said hurriedly. Lady Agatha's study was broken into. The room's been searched, and some papers are missing. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. When did this happen? Just an hour ago. No sign of forced entry, but whoever did it knew exactly what they were after. Without hesitation, Miss Marple wrapped her shawl tightly and followed the constable to the manor. Inside, Lady Agatha greeted them with a mixture of distress and icy composure. This is most unsettling, she said. Those papers contained family records, documents dating back decades. If they've been stolen, it could have serious consequences. Miss Marple surveyed the study. The desk drawer was left open, papers scattered carelessly on the floor. Yet nothing else seemed disturbed. The careful targeting suggested the thief was after something very specific. It seems someone is desperate to conceal the past, Miss Marple murmured. Detective Inspector Bridges arrived shortly thereafter, his usual brisk demeanor tinged with frustration. This changes matters, he said. We have a clear message. The killer, or their accomplice, is still active and willing to take risks. Miss Marple agreed silently. The stakes were higher now. Her thoughts turned to the villagers. Who would benefit most from erasing these records? Who feared exposure? The answers began to surface during a series of conversations Miss Marple held over the next days. She spoke again with Richard Blackwood, whose earlier candor had deepened her respect but not yet unraveled all his secrets. There are family secrets best left untouched, Richard admitted, running a hand through his hair. Those documents held proof of things that could ruin reputations. Eliza was closer to the truth than anyone imagined. And the break-in? Miss Marple asked softly. Richard's eyes darkened. I don't know who's behind it, but it's a warning. Someone wants to scare us all. Miss Marple next sought out Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, whose loyalty was often unquestioned but whose reticence now seemed more meaningful. I heard noises last night, Mrs. Finch whispered. I thought it was the wind, but now I'm not so sure. Someone moved quietly through the corridors. Miss Marple's mind pieced together the scenario, the same careful hands that had orchestrated murder now attempting to erase its trace. The plot thickened when Peter Holloway, the gardener's assistant, approached Miss Marple privately. Miss Marple, I saw someone near the manor the night before the break-in, he confided, eyes wide with fear. A woman, cloaked, moving fast. She dropped a small book. I picked it up but didn't know what to do. Miss Marple examined the book, its worn leather cover cracked with age. Inside, it contained notes, cryptic entries and names linked to the Thornfield family history. This could be important, she said thoughtfully. Did you notice who the woman was? Peter shook his head. No, she vanished before I could see her face. This new lead hinted at a wider conspiracy, involving not only the murder but also the erasure of history. Meanwhile, rumors swirled through St. Mary Mead like wildfire. Whispers of secret meetings, shadowy figures, and hidden agendas set tongues wagging at the village shop and the pub. Mrs. Beatrice Lacey, who had long been at odds with Eliza, grew increasingly agitated. I tell you, this isn't just about Eliza anymore, she confided to Mrs. Carter, the postmistress. There's something bigger at play, something that reaches far beyond the village. Miss Marple's keen ears caught this and many other snippets of gossip, weaving them into her growing tapestry of understanding. Yet, in the midst of turmoil, a quiet but determined figure continued her work. At night, Miss Marple pored over the documents found scattered in Lady Agatha's study, cross-referencing names, dates, and events. She uncovered a story of old betrayals, land deals, lost inheritances, and broken trusts that had shaped Thornfield Manor and the village itself. The past was alive and hungry, feeding into the present. The key, she realized, lay not in the grand gestures but in the subtle interactions, the hesitations, the furtive glances, the careful choice of words. One evening she confronted Lady Agatha privately. Lady Agatha, these documents suggest a secret that someone is desperate to protect, Miss Marple said gently. Lady Agatha's eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Yes, she admitted. A secret that could bring ruin to my family. Eliza threatened to expose it. And now, others will do anything to keep it hidden. Miss Marple nodded. The danger is not over, then. We must be cautious. As the shadows lengthened over St. Mary Mead, the village stood at a crossroads. The murder was no longer an isolated act but part of a wider web of deception and fear. Miss Marple, calm yet vigilant, prepared herself for the next phase of the investigation. The tangled clues were beginning to connect, but the final truth remained just beyond reach. In the quiet of her cottage, she resolved to watch closely, listen carefully, and wait for the moment when the threads would pull tight enough to reveal the real face of the killer. The tension in St. Mary Mead had become palpable, a quiet storm threatening to break with every whispered conversation and nervous glance. The theft of Lady Agatha's family documents had only deepened the shadow hanging over Thornfield Manor, and the village was gripped by unease, with suspicion swirling like the autumn leaves along its narrow lanes. Miss Marple, however, remained calm. She understood that the answers she sought would come not from forceful confrontation but from careful observation and subtle psychological probing. It was the human nature beneath the mask of civility that held the truth. Her mind was particularly focused on Richard Blackwood. The young man's restless energy and guarded sorrow spoke volumes, but Miss Marple sensed he was holding something back, whether out of fear, loyalty, or guilt was yet to be determined. That afternoon, she arranged to visit Thornfield Manor once more, requesting a private conversation with Richard. When he answered the door, his pale face was etched with fatigue, but he welcomed her quietly. "Miss Marple, I'm not sure how much help I can be," he began, voice low. "Sometimes, Mr. Blackwood," she replied with a gentle smile, "it's the smallest things that open the largest doors. I'm not here to judge but to understand." She led him to the sitting room, where the afternoon light filtered softly through lace curtains. They sat opposite one another, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Miss Marple began with a simple observation. "You have been through a great deal in recent days. It is natural for one to feel overwhelmed." Richard nodded, his eyes clouded. "I've tried to protect my family, but I fear my efforts have only made things worse." Her gaze was steady. "And yet you remain. That shows courage." He gave a faint, weary smile. "Perhaps. But I worry that the true danger is closer than I realized." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Richard, when was the last time you saw Miss Fairclough alive?" His hands clenched. "That morning, before the garden party. We spoke briefly. She seemed anxious, worried about something, but she wouldn't say what." "What do you believe she was afraid of?" He hesitated, then admitted, "I think she was uncovering something about Thornfield Manor, something some people wanted kept secret." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Secrets are like shadows, they grow longer when chased." She decided to test his reactions further. "There was a break-in at Lady Agatha's study, documents stolen. Would you know who might have wanted them removed?" Richard's expression tightened, but he answered cautiously. "I have my suspicions, but I can't say for certain. Whoever it is clever and desperate." Miss Marple observed the subtle flicker in his eyes when she mentioned desperation. It was the kind of micro-expression often missed by less observant eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly, "sometimes the greatest threat comes not from outside but from those we trust most." He looked away, a flash of pain crossing his features. The conversation turned to the black lace gloves, the ones found with Eliza's body and the second glove discovered in the drawing room. "You said Eliza was wearing these gloves at the party?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes." She was proud of them, but also cautious. "I think she wore them to hide something, perhaps some mark or injury." Richard's admission offered a new angle. "Did she ever speak of anyone who might want to harm her?" Miss Marple inquired. He swallowed hard. "She mentioned a man from her past, a figure she feared. But she never named him." The silence that followed was thick with implication. Miss Marple sensed it was time to shift tactics. She began recounting a seemingly unrelated anecdote about a distant village where a murderer was caught not by evidence but by a simple, unexpected gesture, a slip of the tongue, a nervous glance. Richard listened intently, his posture stiffening. "And in your case, Mr. Blackwood," Miss Marple concluded softly, "sometimes it is not what one says but what one tries to hide that reveals the truth." His eyes met hers, wide and searching. For a moment, the room was still. Then Richard let out a long breath and spoke quietly. "There's more than one secret in Thornfield Manor. Things I've kept hidden to protect those I love." Miss Marple nodded, encouraging. "I was not as distant from Eliza as I let on. She confided in me about fears that involved people close to us. I wished to help her, but I was afraid. Afraid that revealing too much would ruin everything." "Fear is a powerful motivator," Miss Marple replied. As the conversation deepened, Richard's defenses gradually lowered. He revealed snippets of information, coded messages, strange meetings at odd hours, a hidden letter that Eliza had shown only to him. Yet there were gaps, moments where he faltered or diverted the conversation. Miss Marple noted these quietly, understanding that such hesitation could conceal pain, guilt, or something more sinister. Before leaving, she offered a final, gentle observation. "Sometimes, the greatest kindness is found in truth, even if it causes pain. The past cannot remain buried forever." Richard looked at her, the weight of his burdens clear. As Miss Marple stepped back into the fading light, she felt the invisible threads pulling tighter. The web was closing, but the true trap had yet to spring. Her final test had revealed more than she had hoped, but the killer remained veiled in shadow, hidden behind fear, loyalty, and tangled emotions. The next move would require patience and care. In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, the truth waited to be uncovered. Chapter 5. The Reveal. The drawing room at Thornfield Manor was unusually quiet that evening, the soft glow of candlelight casting long shadows across the polished wood and rich tapestries. The village's eyes were upon Miss Marple as she gathered the household and the principal villagers, including Detective Inspector Bridges, for what promised to be the final act of this troubling drama. Miss Marple, with her gentle but commanding presence, began to speak, her voice calm and steady. "Thank you all for gathering here. What I am about to say may unsettle some, but it is time for the truth to be told." She paused briefly, allowing her words to settle. The faces around her were a mixture of anxiety, defiance, and hope. Richard Blackwood stood close by, his gaze flickering nervously, while Lady Agatha maintained her usual composed demeanor, though a subtle tension gripped her shoulders. Miss Marple continued, "The tragic death of Miss Eliza Fairclough was no accident, nor the act of a stranger, but rather the result of a carefully concealed secret and the fear of exposure." She turned toward Richard. "Mr. Blackwood, you have carried a heavy burden, and your honesty in our last conversation was appreciated. Yet, as I have observed, the truth is seldom one-sided." Then addressing the room, she added, "It is easy to look for the culprit among those closest to the victim, but sometimes the answer lies hidden behind layers of deceit and long-standing grievances." With a deft motion, she produced the 2 black lace gloves, the one found with Eliza's body, and the second discovered near the fireplace. "These gloves are more than mere accessories. They are symbolic but also physical clues. Notice the small tear on the wrist of each, a tear that tells a story." Her eyes scanned the assembled faces. Miss Fairclough wore these gloves to conceal a mark, a burn, inflicted during a heated confrontation. She paused, letting this sink in. The mark was inflicted by Mrs. Penelope Finch, the housekeeper. Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Finch's face drained of color, but Miss Marple's tone remained gentle, almost compassionate. "It was not a premeditated attack," Miss Marple explained. "It was born of desperation and fear. Miss Fairclough threatened to disrupt the order of Thornfield Manor, to expose secrets that some believed must remain buried." Turning to Mrs. Finch, Miss Marple continued, "On the day before the party, an argument erupted over Miss Fairclough's demands for changes to the household routines. Tempers flared, and in a moment of heated frustration, you inflicted that injury." Mrs. Finch nodded slowly, tears glistening. "She was threatening everything I have worked for. I never meant for this to happen." Miss Marple's gaze softened. "But the injury alone did not cause her death. That came later." She addressed the group again. That evening, Miss Fairclough confronted Lady Agatha Thornfield, seeking proof of a family secret, one that could bring ruin. Lady Agatha's composure faltered momentarily. "It is true. Eliza demanded to see the records, and I refused." Miss Marple explained, fearing exposure. Lady Agatha's reaction was one of panic. In a moment of confrontation, things escalated. Eliza stumbled, and the fall at the foot of the stairs was fatal. A silence fell. The implications were heavy. Detective Inspector Bridges stepped forward. "Lady Agatha, do you admit to causing Miss Fairclough's death?" Lady Agatha's voice was steady but laced with regret. "I did not intend to kill her. It was a terrible accident born of fear." Miss Marple nodded. "And the theft of documents was an attempt to cover up the evidence, a desperate act to preserve what remained of the family's reputation." She then addressed the villagers. "This tragedy is a cautionary tale about secrets kept too long and the dangers of fear." Richard Blackwood stepped forward, looking at Lady Agatha with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. Miss Marple concluded, "Justice will take its course, but may this village learn that truth, though painful, is the foundation of peace." The villagers, though shaken, seemed to find a somber relief in the clarity. As the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple remained, her thoughts quietly reflecting on the intricate dance of human nature, the fears, loyalties, and frailties that had woven this tragedy. In the stillness, she knew the village of St. Mary Mead would never be quite the same. The days following the revelation at Thornfield Manor were marked by a quiet, tentative return to normalcy in St. Mary Mead, but the village had irrevocably changed. The familiar routines resumed, the baker kneading dough at dawn, children playing along the lanes, and the church bells ringing, yet beneath this everyday facade lay an undercurrent of unease. Miss Marple observed this subtle shift with her usual patience. The villagers spoke less of the murder and more of what it had uncovered, the fragile nature of trust, the heavy price of secrets, and the delicate balance between justice and mercy. Lady Agatha Thornfield had retreated from public view, her once imposing presence diminished by the weight of guilt and the inevitable legal proceedings. Richard Blackwood, though cleared of suspicion, carried a quiet burden that time alone might ease. Miss Marple herself resumed her place on the garden bench outside her cottage, knitting needles clicking softly in the gentle afternoon sun. But her mind was far from idle, reflecting on the intricate weave of human behavior and the lessons the tragedy had imparted. Visitors came and went, some seeking her counsel, others offering thanks or simply sharing their thoughts. Mrs. Carter, the postmistress, approached one afternoon with a shy smile. "Miss Marple," she said, "the village owes you a great debt. You saw what others missed." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "It is always the small details and the quiet truths that tell the greatest stories, Mrs. Carter." Meanwhile, Detective Inspector Bridges prepared to leave St. Mary Mead, his respect for the village's subtle complexities deepened by his experiences. He visited Miss Marple one final time. "Your insight was invaluable, Miss Marple," he admitted. "This was no ordinary case." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "People are never ordinary, Inspector. And it is our understanding of their nature that guides us to truth." As the inspector departed, the village felt the faint stirrings of healing, yet the shadows cast by the past lingered. In the weeks that followed, life gradually regained its rhythm. The villagers found solace in routine, yet Miss Marple noticed how conversations now carried a new depth, an awareness of the hidden layers within each neighbor's story. At Thornfield Manor, a quiet transformation began. Lady Agatha sought forgiveness and peace, while Richard endeavored to rebuild not just the estate but the trust fractured by grief. Miss Marple herself found comfort in the constancy of her knitting, the familiar motions a balm to a mind ever alert to human frailty. One evening, as twilight settled over the village, she sat in her favorite chair by the window, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Human nature, she mused, was a complex tapestry of kindness and cruelty, truth and deception, fear and courage. The murder had been but one thread pulled taut, revealing the intricate pattern beneath. Her thoughts drifted to Eliza Fairclough, a woman both admired and misunderstood, whose life had been marked by secrets and struggles. Though her story had ended tragically, it had exposed the hidden currents beneath St. Mary Mead's serene surface. Miss Marple's eyes softened as she considered the lessons learned, that justice was not only about punishment but about understanding, and that sometimes the greatest kindness lay in forgiveness. Outside, the village settled into night, peaceful once more yet forever changed. And within her quiet cottage, Miss Marple smiled gently, knowing that while darkness could fall, the light of truth and compassion would always endure. Chapter 6. Quiet Reflections and Unseen Threads. The village of St. Mary Mead was settling into the gentle rhythm of late summer, the warmth of the days slowly giving way to cooler evenings and the soft rustle of leaves. Life had resumed its steady pace, yet beneath the surface, memories of the recent tragedy lingered like a subtle echo, woven into the fabric of the village's collective consciousness. Miss Marple's cottage sat at the edge of the village, surrounded by blooming lilacs and a well-tended garden that was her sanctuary. Inside, the familiar warmth of the fire and the quiet click of knitting needles formed a comforting backdrop to her thoughts. Though the case was officially closed, the lessons it had imparted continued to resonate deeply within her. She often found herself reflecting on the delicate interplay of human nature, the complexities of fear and loyalty, the shadows cast by long-held secrets, and the fragile balance between truth and compassion. It was these very subtleties that had guided her through the tangled threads of the Black Lace murder. One afternoon, as she sipped her tea by the window, a visitor arrived, Miss Eliza's former housemaid, Clara, who had remained in the village throughout the upheaval. The young woman's face was pale but determined. "Miss Marple," Clara began hesitantly, "there's something I should have told you earlier, but I was afraid." Miss Marple gestured kindly. "Please, do not hesitate now." Clara took a deep breath. "On the day of the party, I saw Miss Fairclough speaking with someone in the garden, near the east gate. It was late afternoon, and the person was someone unexpected." Miss Marple's interest piqued. "Who was it?" Clara looked down. "Lady Agatha's cousin, Mr. Frederick Langley. He arrived that morning, unannounced." Miss Marple's mind raced. Frederick Langley had not been mentioned in any of the police interviews, and his sudden appearance had gone largely unnoticed. "Did you hear what they spoke about?" Miss Marple asked gently. Clara shook her head. "No, but Miss Fairclough seemed upset afterward." This revelation opened new pathways in Miss Marple's mind. She decided it was time to seek out Mr. Langley. The cousin was found at a nearby estate, living a quiet life removed from the village's bustle. When Miss Marple mentioned Eliza, his eyes darkened. "She was a thorn in the side of many," he said bitterly. "Her inquiries threatened to expose things that should have remained buried." Miss Marple pressed on. "Did you confront her on the day of the party?" Frederick's jaw tightened. "We spoke briefly, but I made it clear she should cease her investigations." The subtle threat lingered in the air. Back in St. Mary Mead, whispers of Frederick's involvement added fuel to the simmering gossip. Mrs. Beatrice Lacey voiced her suspicions loudly. "That man had the most to lose," she declared. "Eliza's death was no accident, it was calculated." Miss Marple listened, as always, to both spoken words and silent gestures. She understood the village was grappling not just with the crime but with the unsettling realization that betrayal often came from within. In the quiet evenings that followed, Miss Marple returned to her meticulous notes, cross-referencing conversations, timelines, and subtle clues. The pieces slowly aligned to reveal a pattern of fear-driven actions and misguided loyalties. She contemplated the human capacity for both cruelty and kindness, the way secrets could protect or destroy, and how truth, when finally unveiled, brought both pain and relief. One morning, she visited Richard Blackwood again, finding him walking through the manor's gardens with a thoughtful expression. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, "about forgiveness." Miss Marple smiled gently. "A difficult but necessary journey." Their conversation touched on reconciliation, not only with others but within oneself. As the season turned, the village began to heal, its wounds slowly knitting together. Though the shadows cast by the Black Lace murder would never fully fade, St. Mary Mead emerged with a deeper understanding of the fragile bonds that held it together. Miss Marple, ever the quiet observer, found solace in the enduring rhythms of life, the changing seasons, the blooming flowers, and the resilient spirit of a community that had weathered darkness and emerged into light. Though the village of St. Mary Mead had begun to settle after the tumultuous events surrounding Miss Fairclough's death, a subtle unease lingered beneath the surface, like a faint tremor warning of an approaching storm. Miss Marple sensed that the recent revelations, though they had brought a semblance of closure, had only scratched the surface of a deeper web of secrets and resentments. It was during an early autumn afternoon, with leaves turning amber and gold, that a fresh disturbance rippled through the village. At the heart of it was a letter, an unsigned, cryptic note that arrived at the village post office, addressed simply to Miss Marple herself. Mrs. Carter, the postmistress, handed it to Miss Marple with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "This came for you this morning, Miss Marple. No return address, no signature." Miss Marple carefully broke the seal and unfolded the neatly penned note. "The truth you uncovered was only part of the story. Look deeper, for the darkest shadows are yet to be revealed." The message was both a warning and an invitation, stirring a quiet resolve in Miss Marple's mind. In the days that followed, subtle shifts in the village atmosphere confirmed her suspicions. Conversations hushed when she entered rooms, glances were cast quickly away, old tensions, thought dormant, began to flicker anew. One afternoon, Miss Marple visited the village shop, where Mr. Albert Mills greeted her with forced cheerfulness. Yet beneath the surface, his eyes betrayed worry. "Miss Marple," he said carefully, "there are whispers, People uneasy with what's been uncovered. Some feel the village's reputation is at stake. Miss Marple nodded knowingly. Fear and pride often walk hand in hand. Further visits revealed fracturing relationships. Neighbors who had once shared friendship now exchanged curt greetings, old rivalries reignited, and secrets whispered behind closed doors. Lady Agatha, whose name had been cleared but whose heart bore the scars of scandal, was notably absent from many village gatherings. Richard Blackwood, too, seemed burdened, retreating into the shadows of Thornfield Manor. Miss Marple sought out Mrs. Beatrice Lacey, who had grown increasingly vocal in her suspicions. The woman's sharp eyes now held a glint of something harder, determination or perhaps desperation. "There's more to be known," Mrs. Lacey confided. "Eliza's death was the beginning. The village hides darker truths." Miss Marple listened, careful to read between words and gestures. She understood that uncovering the whole truth meant navigating a labyrinth of old grievances and new fears. Her investigation took her back to Thornfield Manor, where she found Lady Agatha unexpectedly forthright. "There are things I withheld," Lady Agatha admitted quietly. "Not out of malice, but to protect those I love. Yet I see now that protection can become imprisonment." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Sometimes, Lady Agatha, the greatest courage is found in facing what we fear most." A breakthrough came when Peter Holloway, the gardener's assistant, approached Miss Marple with news. "I found a hidden compartment in the old library," he said nervously. There were papers, letters, photographs. They seemed to tie several families to events long forgotten. Miss Marple's curiosity was piqued. These new documents suggested a history far more tangled than she had imagined. With the village watching and whispers growing louder, Miss Marple prepared herself to delve deeper into the shadows, aware that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but certain that the truth, no matter how dark, must be brought to light. Chapter 7. Threads unravel further. The discovery of the hidden compartment in the old library at Thornfield Manor sent a ripple of unease through Miss Marple's mind. The contents, carefully preserved letters, faded photographs, and yellowed documents, hinted at a tapestry of connections and betrayals reaching far beyond the immediate tragedy. The past was no longer a distant memory, it was a living force, threatening to engulf the present. Miss Marple returned to her cottage with the carefully wrapped papers, laying them out on her table beneath the soft glow of a lamp. The handwriting was elegant yet hurried in places, the letters filled with veiled references to debts, broken promises, and whispered scandals among the village's oldest families. As she read, a pattern emerged, an intricate web linking the Thornfields, the Laceys, the Fairclaws, and others, entwined in a silent feud that had spanned generations. There were mentions of a disputed inheritance, a long-forgotten duel, and a secret that some had gone to great lengths to conceal. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. It was Richard Blackwood, his expression somber but resolute. "Miss Marple," he said quietly, "I've heard whispers about what you found. If those papers reveal what I suspect, they could change everything." She nodded. "The village's history is far more tangled than it appears on the surface." Richard paced slowly. "I want to help. If the truth can bring peace, it is worth uncovering." Together, they began to cross-reference the letters with the people still living, suspicions deepening and alliances shifting like sand. Meanwhile, the village itself was restless. Old friends eyed each other with caution, and conversations often turned to past grievances resurfacing. Mrs. Beatrice Lacey's accusations grew sharper, her voice louder in the local gatherings. "There are lies beneath every smile," she declared. "Eliza Fairclaw's death opened a door, and we all stand on the threshold." Miss Marple attended one such gathering at the village hall, observing quietly as tension simmered. The community's fault lines were now visible, and it was clear that healing would be neither swift nor easy. At Thornfield Manor, Lady Agatha's health declined under the strain of revelations. Miss Marple visited her one afternoon, finding the once proud woman diminished but still dignified. "There are truths I wish I could undo," Lady Agatha confessed. "But I see now that only through facing them can we find redemption." Miss Marple offered gentle reassurance. Courage is often found in acceptance, Lady Agatha. The past shapes us, but it need not define our future. The following days brought new insights from Peter Holloway, who discovered a series of coded messages within the letters. Miss Marple's understanding deepened as she began decoding references to meetings, secret exchanges, and individuals who had long remained in the shadows. Among the names was one that stood out, a figure who had remained absent from the inquiry but whose influence seemed pervasive. Miss Marple knew the time had come to confront this elusive character, aware that the unfolding mystery was now more dangerous than ever. As the autumn wind swept through St. Mary Mead, carrying with it the scent of falling leaves and impending change, Miss Marple prepared for what lay ahead, ready to untangle the final threads that bound the village's secrets and bring truth into the light. The chill of late autumn had settled over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and rust as the trees shed their leaves and the days grew shorter. Yet within the quiet lanes and cozy cottages, a restlessness persisted, a tension palpable to anyone who looked closely. The recent uncovering of secrets had shaken the very foundations of the village's social fabric, and the calm was but a thin veneer over a growing storm. Miss Marple felt the weight of this unease as she walked the familiar paths to Thornfield Manor. Her thoughts were heavy with the knowledge that the past had yet to fully reveal its final act, and that the truth, long concealed, was now dangerously close to surfacing. Inside the manor, the atmosphere was taut. Lady Agatha, once imperious and unshakable, moved with a fragile grace, her eyes shadowed by worry. Richard Blackwood carried himself with a quiet determination, but the toll of recent events was etched deeply on his face. Miss Marple requested a meeting with both of them in the drawing room, where the flickering fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Lady Agatha, Richard," she began softly, "we stand on the brink of unveiling truths that have long been hidden. It is vital that we face them together, with honesty and courage." Richard nodded solemnly. "We are prepared, Miss Marple." Lady Agatha gave a faint, weary smile. "If the truth can bring peace, it is worth the pain." Miss Marple laid the coded letters and documents on the table between them. These messages point to a figure who has influenced events from the shadows, a person many thought long gone, but whose presence has shaped recent tragedies. She paused, then added, "I intend to confront this individual, to bring clarity where there is confusion." The following day, Miss Marple visited the village's outskirts, where a modest cottage stood cloaked by overgrown hedges and fading autumn flowers. Here lived Mr. Frederick Langley, the elusive cousin whose name had surfaced in Clara's revelation and in the hidden letters. Langley greeted her with guarded politeness, though his eyes flickered with unease. "Miss Marple, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" he asked. "I have come seeking answers, Mr. Langley," she replied calmly. "Your name appears repeatedly in correspondence that suggests involvement in events leading to Miss Fairclaw's death." Langley's expression hardened. "I was trying to protect the family name. That is all." Miss Marple pressed gently. "Protection can become peril when it blinds us to consequences." As their conversation deepened, Langley's defenses began to crumble. He confessed to confrontations with Eliza, efforts to suppress her inquiries, and to the theft of documents from Lady Agatha's study. But the true revelation came when he admitted to an unintentional role in her death. During a heated argument near the stairs, Langley revealed, "She stumbled and fell. I fled in panic, fearing ruin." Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "Truth has a way of surfacing, Mr. Langley. It is better met with honesty than fear." Langley broke down, the burden of guilt evident. Returning to the village, Miss Marple shared her findings with Lady Agatha and Richard. The tangled threads were finally converging. Yet, even as justice loomed, Miss Marple knew that the true work was far from over. The village would need healing, forgiveness, and time. In the days that followed, St. Mary Mead began to reconcile with its past. Old rivalry softened, and a cautious hope took root. Miss Marple, ever watchful, continued to observe with gentle wisdom, understanding that the heart of the mystery was not only in uncovering secrets but in embracing the complexities of human nature. As the last leaves fell and winter approached, the village settled into a quiet peace, forever changed but resilient. Chapter 8. Closing the Circle. Winter's first frost had dusted the rooftops of St. Mary Mead, settling quietly over the village like a silvery shawl. The stillness outside contrasted with the subtle stirrings within the hearts of its residents. The long shadow cast by the Black Lace murder was beginning to lift, revealing a community marked by sorrow but also strengthened by truth and reconciliation. Miss Marple sat by the fireside in her cozy cottage, the soft crackle of burning logs accompanying her reflections. The mystery that had woven itself through the village had finally been unraveled, yet the deeper truth she understood was that human nature, complex, fragile, and often contradictory, was the true heart of the story. The revelations about Frederick Langley's role had brought a sense of closure, but also tempered justice with compassion. Lady Agatha, grappling with the consequences of family secrets and mistakes, had begun the slow journey toward forgiveness and healing. Richard Blackwood, relieved yet burdened, looked to the future with a quiet determination to rebuild both the manor and the trust fractured by grief. Miss Marple's visits to the villagers in the aftermath revealed a shared desire to move forward, though the scars of recent events remained a silent reminder. One crisp morning, she walked through the village square, exchanging nods and soft smiles. At the bakery, Mrs. Pritchard offered a freshly baked scone, a small gesture of warmth and community. "You have done much for us, Miss Marple," Mrs. Pritchard said. "The village is better for it." Miss Marple returned the smile with gentle humility. It is the understanding between neighbors that truly sustains a village. In the days that followed, she took time to revisit the scenes of the mystery, the gardens of Thornfield Manor, the quiet streets where whispers had once flourished, and the library where hidden secrets had been found. Each place was a testament to the delicate balance between light and shadow in human affairs. Her thoughts often returned to Eliza Fairclough, the woman whose life and death had set this all in motion. Miss Marple recognized in her a reflection of the struggles many faced, the desire to uncover truth, the pain of isolation, and the hope for acceptance. In quiet moments, Miss Marple pondered the lessons the case had taught her, that justice required more than uncovering facts. It required empathy, patience, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside her window, Miss Marple settled into her favorite chair with her knitting. The gentle click of needles was a comforting rhythm, a reminder of the continuity of life amid change. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the village lay peaceful beneath a blanket of white. The darkness of the past had been pierced by light, fragile, perhaps, but enduring. In the heart of St. Mary Mead, life would go on, shaped but not defined by the shadows it had faced. And in the quiet wisdom of Miss Marple, there was a comforting certainty that while human nature was complex and sometimes dark, it was also capable of kindness, resilience, and redemption. With a final, contented sigh, she returned to her knitting, the soft glow of the fire casting a warm light over the room, an emblem of hope, healing, and the unending search for truth.